You lost, old man. Laughter echoed around the empty rest stop. The old man just sat quietly, holding a cheap plastic coffee cup, eyes calm and steady. They didn't know who he was, just saw someone old, alone, and slow, until one of them noticed the tattoo on his left arm, and the whole group suddenly stepped back silent as stone. If you believe silence can be its own kind of power type, respect now. The old man's name was Raymond Carter, 77 years old Vietnam veteran, who had served with the legendary MACV-SOG unit during the war. He lived alone in a small apartment downtown, spoke little, and drove cross-country several times each year for one purpose only, visiting the graves of fallen comrades buried in distant state cemeteries. This particular quest stop was just a halfway point between destinations. He only wanted a cup of coffee and a few minutes sitting under the shade trees. He wore faded khaki pants, a worn windbreaker, and a plain baseball cap with no logo. Nothing about his appearance suggested he had ever served his country in combat. When he settled onto the concrete bench, a group of 4 young men climbed out of a large pickup truck, loud and boisterous, already harassing the convenience store clerk inside. Spotting the elderly man sitting alone, and one of them called out loudly, "Hey, Gramps, you escaped from the nursing home." Another one joined in, "Better be careful, he might fall asleep and roll right off that bench." Carter didn't respond. He simply took another quiet sip of his coffee. A third young man walked over and lightly kicked the bench leg. "You deaf old-timer. They don't deliver medications out here, you know." The store employee witnessed the harassment, but deliberately turned away, unwilling to get involved. Carter remained silent, showing no visible reaction to their taunts. The tallest of the group stepped closer, speaking almost directly into Carter's ear. "Either you move along from this spot, or my super soaker's going to heat up your seat real quick." Still, the old man didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't speak. But slowly, deliberately, he rolled up his left sleeve. On his thin, weathered arm was a detailed tattoo, an eagle with talons gripping a serpent, surrounded by curved text reading MACV-SOG, Vietnam, 1968. The entire group fell silent instantly. One of them stammered uncertainly, "Mac, what does that mean?" The leader of the group, tallest, broad-shouldered head, shaved close, wearing surplus military clothing from his Army Reserve training, was the only one who recognized the significance. He took a step backward. "Don't touch him," he said quietly. His friend looked confused. "Why not MACV-SOG? That was Special Operations. Joint Command. These guys did things we can't even imagine." The remaining member tried to maintain his bravado. "So what? He's old now. What's he gonna do?" But their leader shook his head firmly. "You don't understand. I met a former SOG operator once. These aren't the kind of people you want to mess with. Ever." Carter slowly rolled his sleeve back down and stood up from the bench. The store clerk continued pretending to clean tables, still refusing to intervene. Other travelers in the area watched from a distance, but none approached to help. The group dispersed without another word, but nobody apologized. Nobody showed remorse. Carter didn't demand an apology. He simply looked at the group leader and nodded slightly. "You know, that's enough." Then he walked calmly toward his parked car. The young men stood in uncomfortable silence, watching him leave as if they had just encountered a ghost returning from long-forgotten battlefields. An hour later, the group's SUV pulled into another rest stop down the highway. Nobody spoke. The music had been turned off. The earlier jovial atmosphere had completely evaporated. Mason, the group leader, sat staring out the window, lost in troubled thoughts. He pulled out his phone and searched MACV-SOG Tattoo Vietnam War. Articles appeared immediately. Top secret unit, survival rate below 25%. An old documentary clip played automatically, a news report about a veteran displaying an eagle and serpent tattoo identical to what they had just seen. Mason looked down at his own arm, a fresh tattoo still healing from his recent Army Reserve training. Then he spoke quietly to his friends. "You guys have no idea what we just did. That man isn't just a veteran. He's a living legend." One of them asked, "What do you mean?" Mason clenched his fist. "We just mocked someone who probably saved dozens of lives behind enemy lines." The group sat in stunned silence. That evening, Mason posted on his military reserve forum, "Today I met a man who didn't say a word, but taught me everything. He just rolled up his sleeve. I hope he knows I'm sorry." The post went viral within the military community. A week later, the rest stop manager received an unexpected package in the mail, a handcrafted wooden sign reading, "Respect those who bear silent tattoos." Below it, smaller text, "If he returns, give him the best seat available." The sign was installed immediately above the bench where Carter had been sitting. 2 months later, Carter stopped at the same rest stop during another cross-country journey. The old concrete bench had been replaced with a new wooden one, polished and well-maintained, with a small plaque mounted on the side. He sat down and found a bottle of water waiting for him along with a handwritten note, "We remember you. Thank you for coming back." Nobody rushed out to make a big scene. It wasn't necessary, but a young truck driver, just stepping out of his cab, noticed Carter sitting there and stopped abruptly. The driver stood straight and rendered a crisp military salute. Carter nodded in acknowledgement. Then he closed his eyes, leaned back against the bench, as if resting during a long journey that this time felt a little more peaceful. Some people don't need to shout to be heard. They just need to roll up their sleeve and let silence speak for them. Subscribe to Steel Heart Stories if you believe respect should be given to those who never demand it. If you've ever seen quiet strength triumph over loud ignorance, share this story now. Later that same day, Mason couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. He drove to a local VFW hall and found an elderly veteran sitting alone at the bar. "Sir, can I ask you something? What do you know about MacFsog?" The old veteran's expression changed immediately. "Where did you hear that name, son?" "I met someone today, older man with a tattoo." The veteran set down his beer and turned to face Mason directly. "Eagle gripping a snake." "Yes, sir." "Son, you just met one of the most dangerous men who ever wore an American uniform. And I mean that as the highest compliment possible." The veteran continued, "MacFsog conducted operations so classified that most records are still sealed 50 years later. These men jumped behind enemy lines with no backup, no extraction plan, no guarantee they'd ever come home." Mason felt his stomach drop. We made fun of him." "You what?" "Called him names, told him to move. I stopped it when I saw the tattoo, but..." The veteran shook his head slowly. "Let me tell you something about SOG operators. They could kill you 17 different ways with a coffee stirrer. But more importantly, they're the reason you have the freedom to be stupid enough to disrespect them." That night, Mason researched everything he could find about MacFsog operations. He learned about missions so dangerous that volunteers were required to sign waivers, acknowledging they might never return. He read testimonies from rescued POWs who credited SOG teams with saving their lives. He discovered that many SOG veterans suffered from severe PTSD and received little recognition for their service because their missions remained classified. Mason realized he had mocked a man who had voluntarily walked into hell to protect people he'd never met. He posted a longer message on social media. "Today, I learned that true strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. Sometimes it just sits quietly on a bench drinking coffee, hoping to be left alone." The post was shared thousands of times within the veteran community. Comments poured in from other SOG veterans and their families. "These men carried burdens most of us can't imagine. My father served with the SOG. He never talked about what he did. Now I understand why." Respect isn't something you earn through boasting. It's something you carry through silent service. Mason's story spread to veteran forums, military Facebook pages, and eventually local news outlets. The rest stop where the incident occurred became an unexpected pilgrimage site for veterans who wanted to pay their respects. A memorial fund was established to maintain the bench and provide free coffee for elderly veterans. But Carter himself never sought publicity. He continued his quiet journeys to visit fallen comrades, unaware that his simple gesture of rolling up his sleeve had sparked a nationwide conversation about respect for veterans. The incident taught an entire generation that heroes don't always wear uniforms or demand recognition. Sometimes they wear faded clothes and sit alone, carrying memories of service that younger generations can barely comprehend. Mason never saw Carter again, but he never forgot the lesson: true strength speaks in whispers, not shouts. 6 months later, the rest stop had become something unexpected, a place of quiet pilgrimage. Veterans from across the region would stop by not for gas or snacks, but to sit on Raymond Carter's bench for a few minutes of reflection. A guest book appeared filled with messages, "Thank you to all the silent heroes. My grandfather never talked about Korea. Now I understand his silence." Some stories are too sacred for words. The wooden plaque beside the bench had been replaced with a larger memorial dedicated to those who served in silence and carry their service with dignity. Carter continued his regular journeys unaware of the movement his simple act had inspired. But word spread through veteran networks: if you see an elderly man with a Mac of Sog tattoo, you stand up and show respect. Not because it's required, but because it's right. The lesson spread beyond military communities to schools where teachers began discussing the difference between demanding attention and earning respect. Mason, now completing his reserve training, carried a different perspective about service and sacrifice. He learned that the strongest people often speak the softest words, and that true courage doesn't need an audience. Some heroes never stop serving, they just learn to serve quietly. There are people who don't need to shout to be heard. They just roll up their sleeve and silence speaks louder than any words. Subscribe to Steel Heart Stories if you believe respect should be given to those who never demand it. Wounds and honor, because some heroes never stop serving.